Good morning. When I was 8 years old, I was on my summer vacation with my family here in Nantucket. It was August 1996, and there was a hurricane gathering strength in the Atlantic. It was called Hurricane Edouard. Many of you may remember it. Edouard was predicted to make landfall in southeastern Massachusetts. Now, this was only a couple of years after Hurricane Bob, which we all remember was so devastating, and Nantucket was in a flurry of activity to prepare, boarding up windows, stockpiling food. Now, in the end, it ended up missing us and going southeast of the island. So it didn't actually make landfall, but the risk was real, and it was a risk that I didn't appreciate at the time. At the time, as a child, I was excited about seeing the huge waves and playing in the wind, but I didn't really see the danger. And it took me a long time to understand the real danger of climate change events like this. And it was a process. As a preteen, I intellectually understood the threat, but I didn't really see how it applied to me. But eventually I realized the severity, and eventually I felt an obligation to act. And I'm sure a lot of you have gone through a similar process, and it's happening on a national level as well. I recently read an article in Wired magazine where they talk about this phenomenon. And it's when there's a big, scary, seemingly insurmountable challenge that this process happens. So it starts with denial. People claim it's not happening, I don't see it, I don't see the evidence for it, so therefore it's not a thing. And then people realize that it is a thing, but they're indifferent. They say, I don't see the impacts to me. And so this indifference grows until it reaches a point of peak indifference. And at this point, you can no longer ignore the problem. So you have two choices. One, you can panic, not recommended, or two, you can problem solve. And so I'm a trained attorney, and so my decision-making process goes like this. I gather the facts and the evidence, I weigh the pros and cons, and I hopefully come to a rational decision. I'm probably sure a lot of you follow a similar process. And that's what we do at the Nantucket Data Platform. We're all about empowering evidence-based decision-making to make Nantucket smarter and stronger, and in the context of climate change, safer as well. So I want to give you a little bit of background on Nantucket Data Platform, NDP, but to do that well, I have to talk about a problem first, which is this. Businesses have data analytics. Nike doesn't let a shoe off its line without pouring millions of dollars into market research, the color, the fit, etc. But communities, by and large, do not. And leaders tell us this is a massive problem. Because if you're making decisions without the facts and the evidence, you run 4 key risks. You waste money, you waste time. Leaders have told us time and again that they sit in meetings debating the facts, debating things that are knowable when they should be debating what to do about them. There are reputational risks as well, and bad outcomes, of course. And so to mitigate these risks, we've created the Nantucket Data Platform. And we're working on data and analytics projects in 10 different policy areas. So if you start in the middle, you can see the little icon of the people. That represents our population and demographic work. And then going around the outer edge to the right, you'll see education, law enforcement, make sure this microphone works, small business and local economy. In the middle there, that's our survey panel. We've got transportation, healthcare, housing, environmental, that's the tree, and then municipal finance at the bottom. How do we do this? We're supported by an international team. When we really hit the ground running last spring, we had about 3 or 4 data scientists. And now we have over 40 in countries all across the world. And they're amazing, amazing people to work with. They're bright, they're smart, they're competent. You know, think of your favorite person at work, the person you go to when you want to get stuff done. I'm lucky enough to have 40 of them. And they're really mission driven. They care deeply about coastal resilience, and they care deeply about giving Nantucket the resources and the tools it needs to make decisions in a good way. And so you can think about maybe cutting a trail, a hiking trail, right? You could cut down the trees with an axe, but if a new tool is invented to do the job better, such as a chainsaw, you're probably going to want to use that. And that's what we're all about. And the community is getting on board as well. They're seeing the power of data and what it can do. We presented at the Dreamland last summer. I recognize a few of you in the audience who were at that presentation. And it was a beautiful summer afternoon in July. And we were hoping that, a couple of our friends would show up and support us and listen to us talk about data. But we actually ended up selling out the auditorium. And the demand was so high that we had to run a second event later in the summer to redo it. And there we talked about our effective population study, which settled a decades-old debate. How many people actually live on Nantucket? So with all of our studies, we start with a pressing question. What's the island's population? We gathered multiple sources and calculated the 2017 population of Nantucket year-round at 17,160 people. And then we repeated the process for 2018, and it came to be 17,890 people. So we gained roughly 700 year-round residents, and I was one of them. And so we thought about, yes, we want to know the year-round population, but Nantucket isn't all about the year-round population. There are seasonal flows, tons and tons of visitors coming on and off the island. And so this is the chart that you see here. Using data from the ferries and the airport, we're able to identify the seasonal flows. So you can see we start with January on the top and the months march around the outer rim of the graph. And you can see that the population holds pretty steady under 20,000 throughout the winter. And there's a peak in April, that's Daffodil Weekend. And then there's another peak in May, so Fagawi. As many of you know, it's our sailing race, 3-day weekend, it gets a little bit crazy here on the island. And then it grows, 4th of July, another big peak, and it rises steadily until August 12th, which was the day that the Boston Pops performed. And that was our biggest day 2 years running. And then after Labor Day, it drops off. Those peaks you see in the fall are summer traffic, driven a lot by weddings. And then we have one last hurrah at Christmas stroll, and it tapers off from there. And the great thing about this graph is that it shows the power of the data, the trends and the patterns that you can see. If you look at the 4th of July, in 2017, 4th of July was on a Tuesday. So there was a big peak on the weekend before. But the next year it was on a Wednesday. So it actually split the population, and you can see the double peak for the weekend before and the weekend after. And so this kind of information is super, super valuable, right? To understand with accuracy, with precision, how many people are coming on and off the island. And Nantucket was a town that didn't truly accurately know its population. So imagine you're in charge of a community and you don't know the population. You know it grows and changes over the course of the year, but you don't have the precise numbers. You don't know it with precision. And that's where Nantucket was a year ago, but now we know. We also wanted to understand the daily flows. So this map is net change over the day. So you can see in the beginning, the red valleys, that's the slow boat leaving at 6:30 in the morning. And then we gain visitors, there's another little dip, and at 10:30 we're about break even. And it kind of rises steadily from there with another dip at 5 p.m. when people leave, their rentals are done, and then it builds until the evening time. Now this is my favorite visualization that we've done, and it kind of brings everything together. This is a Saturday in July, so it's an average of 4 Saturdays in July 2017. And on the upper right-hand corner, you can see the key. It shows you the time. The blue is people leaving, the green is people coming, and there's a population counter under there as well. So those green and blue boats, those are the actual ferries. And as we zoom out, we can see the activity across the island. The darker the dot, the more population activity there is. And we knew that people were coming from across the country, but we didn't really know where they were coming from until now. So we took origin and destination data for visitors to map that. And when the map zooms out, you'll see all of the places where people go to and come from during this Saturday in July. So obviously, New England, hotspot, California, Florida. We were a little surprised by Texas. We get a lot of Texans here. And then when you zoom back in on New England, you can see the granularity. And there's a whole armada of ferries. I had no idea we had so many ferries coming in and out. So I'm not going to play the whole thing, but if you want to see the whole thing, just visit our website, nantucketdataplatform.com, and you can check it out. So now that we thought, back up, great. So now that we looked at the people population, we wanted to look at the vehicle population as well. This is a newly completed study we've just done to understand the net flow of vehicles on and off the island in 2017 and 2018. No huge surprises here. Obviously a big surge at the beginning of the summer, and a lot of them leave towards the end of the summer. Census. We worked with the town to identify additional addresses that weren't on the latest census list. So we identified 800 additional addresses. That represents about 2,200 people. And at a conservative estimate of about $2,000 per person in state and federal funding, that's $4.4 million per year. And over the 10 years of the census, that becomes $44 million, which is huge. And it's found money that Nantucket wouldn't ordinarily have been able to pick up. So make sure you fill out your census forms, please. We're also working on housing. We're building a housing inventory for the island. We started this with work for the Affordable Housing Trust. This is just a snapshot of vacation rentals. It's a very, very early mock-up, but the entire housing inventory will identify every single dwelling unit on island. And not just the dwelling units, but also their uses. So whether they're owner-occupied, vacation rental, rented to a year-rounder, etc. They'll include things like square footage, lot size, sewer versus septic, assessed values. So when we have the whole dashboard completed, you'll be able to go in, put in the filters you want and the characteristics that you like to see, and then properties will pop up that fit those characteristics, and you can drill down. We're working on a survey panel as well. This is actually probably my most favorite project that we're doing because it's a super powerful tool. I'm sure you've experienced in your communities, people use surveys to kind of capture the data that they can't capture with hard data. But it's really, really difficult to write a good survey. Until we started this work, I didn't realize how difficult it was. And we have people on our team with PhDs in survey methodology and survey design. And so we've built this community survey panel, which utilizes an intentionally selected and curated sample of individuals to answer questions with a high degree of information quality. We started with the housing survey. We ran that, closed just a couple weeks ago, and we set a stretch goal of 400 responses. And we actually ended up at the close of the survey with over 1,100 completed responses. We're running an island life survey for Remain that we just launched last week. And if you're on island for 6 weeks out of the year or more, you can go fill it out. Now, I want to take a beat and bring us back to this idea of the fork in the road, where you can panic or you can problem solve. At NDP, we know that climate change is Nantucket's next great challenge. How well we meet it will depend on the quality of our information. So imagine you were in charge of coastal resilience on Nantucket, and imagine you didn't have any data to support your decision-making process. It's kind of a scary position to be in. It'd be nice to have some basic facts to understand what to do next. And this community has done really, really amazing things. And I've been really excited and proud to see of all the projects that everyone's working on. But I think most of the stakeholders in the coastal resilience community here on Nantucket would agree that we have a long way to go. And as we continue on that journey, I'm pretty sure we're going to want data analytics to help. And we need to act now. We're increasingly seeing the effects of climate change. This is a picture of Broad Street during a winter storm. This is the sandbar at Jetties. I took this picture just a couple days ago, beautiful day, and still there's a foot of water in front of it. Nantucket is suffering from extreme erosion, as are other areas of the island, such as Baxter Road and Nantucket Bridge. We don't know how long it's going to be able to withstand these extreme weather events. So we started learning. Our journey on coastal resilience began in the fall of 2017, when the City of Boston's Resilient Boston Harbor project published detailed maps showing the impact of flooding and weather events on low-lying areas. These flood zone maps and models were created by the Woods Hole Group, and they proved so accurate during that January 2018 storm that Mass Department of Transportation actually asked Woods Hole to produce similar maps for the entire Massachusetts coastline. So we've spoken to coastal resilience experts like Bud Reese. He's the former CEO of the New England Aquarium, and he's a member of the Green Ribbon Commission, which is one of the groups behind the Resilient Boston Harbor Project. They also convene leaders from Boston's key sectors to support their climate action plan. And these conversations have helped us understand what kinds of things cities like Boston are doing. What are their approaches? What are their methodologies? What's working? What's not working? To help us kind of scope our work as well. We've spoken to scientists like Kirk Bosma at the Woods Hole Group, who've shared their methodologies, and we've explored with them where their work ends and where ours can begin. So according to Kirk, the models will be available this summer, so we'll have the entire Nantucket coastline charted out and available to use, which is a hugely valuable data input. And the important thing about these new flood zone models is that they don't just look at blanket sea level rise, but they look at water pathways, which is really crucial. We've talked a lot about sea level rise at this conference already, and we sometimes tend to talk about it in a blanket way. The water's going to rise 2 feet, it's going to rise 6 feet, it's going to rise 12 feet. But it's really important to know where the water's actually going. It's not going to rise steadily. I like to use the bathtub analogy, which I learned from Kirk. If you turn on a faucet and fill the bathtub, the water will rise steadily along the sides of the tub. But if you throw a 3-year-old in there and they're splashing and playing with toys, the water's sloshing everywhere, and that's really what a storm looks like. It's not just a steady rise. And so NDP is going to use this work from the Woods Hole Group, and we're going to overlay our Nantucket-specific data that we've been gathering over the last 2 years to create this essential community resource, which will actually analyze and quantify and measure the true impacts to the island. We're calling it the Coastal Resilience Data Platform. And it will cover a lot of different categories of impact. I'm not going to read these all out. You guys can all read faster than I can speak. And we've covered a lot of these at the conference already, but I do want to touch on vulnerable populations because that's something that often doesn't get as much airtime. We've talked about elevating buildings, building seawalls, protecting the natural environment, but our people are just as important, if not more important. And imagine your grandmother lived here on Nantucket. She's 80 years old, she lives alone. Wouldn't it be great to have emergency personnel know where she lives and actually be able to visit her during a hurricane? Or a single mother with 2 kids and a baby who needs to access health care, but like Jeff described yesterday, the roads are washed out and she can't make it to the hospital. Using our deep population and demographic work, we can run these social vulnerability analyses to understand who's in harm's way, to help the town actually prepare and protect these populations. So the elderly, disabled, infants, mobility impaired. And this video is a quick video that our GIS team brought together. It's a mock-up, so super basic, just for illustration purposes, but it shows the island. The blue is tidal flooding, and the red areas are flood inundation. And this is based on the old data, not the new data that we'll be getting. And so if you zoom in on the Brant Point area, you can see the flood inundation going across the whole point. What we've done is we've taken our data from the housing work, and we've overlaid that to identify different parcels and to put in what those parcels are used for. So there's 3 categories: year-round, permanent resident, seasonal resident, and vacationer. You can see the different colors. And so if you have this information, if you know where people are living, you can target your resources. If there's a storm in February, you know that most of the seasonal and vacationers, they're going to be gone. Those places will be vacant. So you want to target your resources on the places where people actually live. We've put assessed value in there as well, and we'll overlay multiple different data sets, specifically things like demographics, so we can pinpoint on the map where all the people over 70 live or all the infants under 2 years old. And so the takeaway is that we're optimists and we can help. This process will lead to a smarter and stronger Nantucket, and I believe there's a clear path forward, and it starts with gathering the right information. One specific area that I want to touch on is allocating resources wisely, which is really key. We all know that climate change and coastal resilience is a multi-billion-dollar problem, but we don't have $1 billion or more to put into it right now. Say we start with $10 million. Where do we put it? Where are we going to have the most bang for our buck? So at NDP, we believe that vague ideas and fears lead to hopelessness and inaction. Data leads to action, and action leads to resilience. And we want to help with that transformation. So if we bring this all back to the idea of a pressing question, there's one question that we've been asked time and time again. Can we make Nantucket an international leader in coastal resilience? And we think so. Historically, Nantucket has been a leader in racial integration, land conservation, even bike paths. And with a dedicated and engaged community of stakeholders, I've seen it in this room, people are passionate, they care about this issue. And you take that energy and you add the new resources and the tools that NDP is developing, and there's a real opportunity for Nantucket to be a leader in coastal resilience as well. Thank you.
Sorry, am I on? Thanks, Bobby. Wait a minute. Questions. We've got a few minutes for questions for Carolyn. I think there's some good information that came out, and let's take advantage of the experts. Yes, ma'am, let me bring you the microphone.
I wondered how you got the data for the overlay of summer residents who are here or not here in February.
Thank you. So most of that information came from our housing study that we're completing, and we've incorporated both the effective population and the housing work. So the effective population is a combination of different sources. The year-round resident comes from two primary sources, the street list, which is our local census, and information from third-party data providers such as Civis. And they collect information on 250 million Americans. And using that, we identified additional people who weren't on the street list who do consider Nantucket their permanent residence. And then the housing work comes from this study that we're doing for the Affordable Housing Trust. And there we've gathered housing information from the assessor's roll, vacation rentals, all sorts of inputs to identify which structures are used for which purposes. So using that and using pretty extensive address matching methods, you're able to arrive with pretty high confidence which properties are used for which purposes.
Other questions? Let me get to the microphone, sir.
Do you have any intention or plans how to inventory the extremely large amount of unpermitted housing units?
That's a good question. And it's tough. It's really, really tricky to do that. We've started with gathering information. We've started with gathering information from the health department, so inspections and violations, which helps fill in that picture. And a lot of the addresses that we gather aren't from really official sources, so that will include some addresses that aren't really legal or standardized housing units as well. But it's tough, and it's something that we continue to work on.
Get back to you.
Yeah, and so we've spoken to a lot of different communities during the course of this work. And what we've found is by and large, communities aren't using data analytics. Really large cities like New York or Boston will sometimes have a data team, but it's really, really cost prohibitive. Like I mentioned, we have 40 plus data scientists, and a town like Nantucket or a mid-sized community can't support that team. And so that's actually the next phase. Here on Nantucket, we're a break-even initiative, but other communities have asked us to speak. Hartford, Sarasota, Palm Beach, Santa Fe, and all of them have told us, we don't have this and we really, really need it. And so we're exploring doing the same thing and replicating our methodologies in those communities. And that will be another branch of the company, but on Nantucket we'll stay break even. And the work that we do in those communities will be able to be funneled back into this community here.
Hold on a second.
In what sense?
Does most of the money come from real estate taxes? What's the large piece of the revenue? What's the large piece of the revenue stream on Nantucket?
So our funding for these projects?
Or the town's funding, when you, not the research project, but if you develop an initiative to address any one of these things that you've identified, and the town decides that they are going to spend some of their resources on it, monetary resources, where do those come from? What revenue stream should the town be looking at or relying on in order to address those initiatives?
Right. So I can't speak on behalf of the town. We're a separate entity, and we work closely with the town on a lot of these projects, but we're objective. Our responsibility is to pull together the facts and the evidence, and then we take that, we stay neutral, and we serve that up to decision makers in the town and other stakeholders to make the decisions and to set policy. So you'll have to speak with someone at the town about where their resources come from. I could hazard a guess, but don't want to give you any misinformation.
I think we can take one last question, and then we have to move on. So anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks. Wonderful presentation. Just under the broad umbrella of resiliency, one of the things, I understand this isn't the topic today, but economic resiliency I think is important. And then I'm going to scope right down to kind of a granular level, and that is, can you also be, or are you gathering commuter data? So commuter book, with the idea being that typically a commuter book at the High Line or an airline are work type people. So the idea would be we know who's coming and going, who's working, or we have an idea of that, we have a handle on that. And I think that that's one area of information that would help us to develop an understanding of where Nantucket earned dollars are going. Are they, primarily being exported? If they are, is there some way to keep them on island? Perhaps to enrich these services or others. It's just one area of data, but it falls under the broad umbrella of economic resiliency.
Yeah, that's a great question. Commuters is something that we've been looking at and we've been analyzing in the context of our effective population study. And so we have ideas about the numbers of commuters who are commuting on a daily basis, both on and off the island. But it's something that we're exploring in more detail. So with our Island Life Survey, the one I mentioned earlier, there's an associated questionnaire that's all about commuters. So we're circulating that across the island and combining that with qualitative interviews to develop a really, really rich picture of commuters, where they're going, where they're coming from, and what the impacts are to the island economy.
Okay, I think we're going to move on. Carolyn, thank you so much. Wonderful.